He had nothing but a tired horse and broken dreams. She had everything to lose. When their eyes met across that ranch yard, neither knew their lives would change forever.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day.
The summer of 1873 brought dust and drought to the small town of Cedar Valley, but it also brought something else. It brought Elijah Carter, a wandering cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, riding into town on a tired horse, with nothing but a worn saddle and a heart full of unspoken loneliness. He had been drifting for 7 years since losing his family farm to the banks. He worked wherever work found him, never staying long enough to plant roots, never staying long enough to feel the ache of leaving. At least, that was what he told himself. The truth lived deeper in his chest, where he kept the memory of his mother's dying wish that he would find happiness someday. Cedar Valley needed ranch hands. The Whitmore spread was the largest in the territory, and old Henry Whitmore was too stubborn to admit his age was catching up with him. Elijah rode out to the ranch expecting nothing more than honest work and a place to rest his head for a few months before moving on again. What he found instead was Josephine Whitmore standing on the front porch, with her auburn hair catching the afternoon light like fire, and her green eyes studying him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She was 24 years old, the only daughter of Henry Whitmore, and she had turned down every suitor who had come calling for the past 6 years. "You here for work?" she asked, her voice carrying across the yard with surprising strength. Elijah removed his hat and felt something shift inside his chest that he did not understand. "Yes, ma'am. I heard you were hiring. My father does the hiring. He is in the barn." She did not smile at him. She did not offer welcome, but she also did not look away. And neither did he. Something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them could name, but both of them felt. It was the beginning of everything. Henry Whitmore hired Elijah on the spot. Good help was hard to find, and something about the quiet cowboy told Henry that this man would work harder than most and complain less than any. He was right. Elijah threw himself into the work with the kind of dedication that came from having nothing else to live for. The first month passed in a blur of mending fences and herding cattle and falling into his bunk each night with muscles aching and dreams empty. He saw Josephine every day, but their interactions were brief and careful. She brought water to the men during long afternoons. She helped with the horses. She ran the household with quiet efficiency after her mother had passed 5 years before. It was the garden that brought them together. Elijah discovered it by accident one evening when he wandered beyond the bunkhouse and found Josephine kneeling in the dirt behind the main house, her hands working the soil around struggling tomato plants. The drought had been hard on everything green, but she refused to let her mother's garden die. "Water is not enough," Elijah said quietly, and Josephine jumped at the sound of his voice. "Sorry. Did not mean to startle you." She sat back on her heels and pushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "What do you mean water is not enough? The soil is tired. It needs rest or nourishment. My mother used to mix crushed eggshells and coffee grounds into the dirt. Said it gave the plants strength." Josephine looked at him differently then, seeing something beyond the dusty cowboy who rarely spoke more than a handful of words. "Your mother had a garden? Best one in the county. Before we lost the farm." He never talked about the past, but something about the way Josephine looked at him made the words come easier than they should have. "I am sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." She rose to her feet and brushed the dirt from her dress. "Would you show me what your mother did with the garden?" So began the quiet courtship that neither of them acknowledged, but both of them cherished. Every evening after supper, Elijah would find his way to the garden where Josephine waited. They worked side by side as the sun set orange and purple over the distant mountains. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the cattle, the stubbornness of tomato plants. But as the weeks turned into months, the conversations grew deeper. Josephine told him about her mother, about the fever that took her, about the guilt of not being able to save her. Elijah told her about his family, about the day the bankmen came, about the years of wandering that followed. "Do you ever think about staying somewhere?" Josephine asked one evening, as autumn painted the leaves gold. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his hands still working the soil. "Never used to." "And now?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw everything he could not say written plainly in those storm-gray eyes. "Now I think about it more than I should." The garden flourished under their care. The tomato plants that had been dying produced more fruit than the kitchen could use. Henry Whitmore noticed the change in his daughter, the way she smiled more often and hummed while she worked. He also noticed the way her eyes followed Elijah whenever he crossed the yard. One evening, Henry called Elijah to the front porch and handed him a cup of coffee. They sat in silence for us, while watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "You are a good man, Elijah Carter." "I try to be, sir. My daughter has not smiled this much since her mother was alive." Elijah felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "She is an easy woman to admire, sir. I would never disrespect her or you." Henry nodded slowly. "I know. That is why I am telling you that you do not have to keep your distance anymore. Life is short, son. Happiness is rare. When you find it, you hold on with both hands." That was all the blessing Elijah needed. The following Sunday, he asked Josephine to walk with him along the creek that bordered the Whitmore property. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood fires. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the old oak tree where Josephine used to play as a child. "I never planned to stay anywhere," Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion. "I spent 7 years running from the pain of losing everything. I told myself that if I never put down roots, I could never be hurt again." Josephine took his hand, and the touch sent warmth spreading through his entire body. "And now I understand that running is not living. Now I understand that the only thing worse than losing something precious is never having it at all." He turned to face her fully, his calloused hands gentle as they cradled hers. "Josephine Whitmore, I do not have much to offer. I have no land, no wealth, no fancy words, but I have a heart that beats only for you, and if you will have me, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Tears sparkled in her green eyes, but her smile was brighter than any sunrise he had ever seen. "Elijah Carter, I have been waiting my whole life for a man who sees me the way you do. My answer is yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and the old oak tree stood witness to the beginning of their forever. They married in the spring, when the garden was blooming and the world seemed full of promise. Henry Whitmore gave them a piece of land on the eastern edge of the ranch, and Elijah built a small house with his own hands. Every nail he drove was a promise. Every board he laid was a declaration of his intention to stay. The first year of marriage was everything Elijah had never dared to dream. He woke each morning with Josephine beside him, her auburn hair spread across the pillow like fire, her breathing soft and steady. They worked the land together. They built the garden together. They created a life together. When Josephine told him she was expecting a child, Elijah wept for the first time since he was a boy. They were tears of joy so profound that they surprised him. He had forgotten that tears could mean anything other than sorrow. But life in the frontier was never certain, and happiness was often borrowed rather than owned. It started with a cough that Elijah dismissed as nothing. Dust from the fields, he told himself. The dry autumn air. But the cough grew worse as winter approached, and soon he was fighting for breath after simple tasks that used to be effortless. Josephine watched her husband weaken and felt fear wrap its cold fingers around her heart. She sent for the doctor from town, a kind old man who examined Elijah and spoke to Josephine in hushed tones outside the bedroom door. "His lungs are failing," the doctor said quietly. "I have seen this before. There is nothing that can be done except to make him comfortable." "How long?" "Weeks. Perhaps a month or two if he is strong. Josephine refused to accept it. She prayed every night. She made Elijah drink every remedy she could find. She held on to hope with both hands even as it slipped through her fingers like water. Elijah knew the truth. He saw it in the doctor's eyes, and in the way Josephine's hands trembled when she thought he was sleeping. He was not afraid of dying. He had made peace with death long ago, during the hard years of wandering. What he could not bear was leaving her. "You have given me more happiness in 2 years than I found in my entire life before," he told her one evening as they sat before the fire. His voice was weaker now, but his eyes still held the same love they had always held for her. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she whispered. "Promise me you will not spend your life mourning. Promise me you will find joy again. Promise me you will tell our child about me, about us, about how love can transform even the most broken heart." Josephine could not stop the tears that fell down her cheeks. "How can I promise to move on when you are my whole world?" Elijah reached up and touched her face with a tenderness that broke her heart. "Because our love does not end with me. It lives on in you. It lives on in our child. It lives on in every flower that blooms in the garden we built together." As winter deepened, Elijah grew weaker. He could no longer leave the bed, but he insisted that Josephine tell him about everything outside their window. She described the snow on the mountains, the way the icicles caught the morning light, the tracks of rabbits crossing their yard, and she told him about their child growing stronger inside her every day. On the last night of his life, Elijah asked Josephine to sing to him. She climbed into the bed beside him and held his frail body against hers, and she sang the lullaby that her mother used to sing to her. The song filled the small house with a sweetness that seemed to push back the darkness for just a little while. "I love you," Elijah whispered when the sun ended, "more than words could ever say, more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anything." "I love you too," Josephine whispered back. "I will love you for the rest of my days and beyond." His breathing grew shallow, his eyes fluttered closed, and then, with the last breath that left his body, he spoke one word, just one. Her name, Josephine. It was a prayer. It was a promise. It was a declaration that even death could not erase the love that had transformed them both. Spring came late that year, as if the world itself was mourning. But when the snow finally melted and the ground thawed, Josephine went to the garden that she and Elijah had built together. She knelt in the dirt, just as she had been kneeling on the day he first spoke to her, and she planted seeds. She planted flowers. She planted vegetables. And in the center of the garden, she planted a rose bush that she had ordered from the city. When her daughter was born 3 months later, Josephine named her Rose. Rose grew up hearing stories of her father, of the wandering cowboy who came to Cedar Valley looking for work, and found something far more precious instead. She grew up tending the garden that her parents had built together. She grew up knowing that love was not measured by years but by depth, not by duration, but by devotion. And every year on the anniversary of her father's passing, Rose would find her mother sitting beside the rose bush in the center of the garden, speaking softly, as if he could hear her. Perhaps he could. Perhaps love that profound creates bridges between worlds that the living cannot see. The story of Elijah and Josephine spread throughout Cedar Valley and beyond. People spoke of the cowboy whose last word was his wife's name, of the love that bloomed in a struggling garden and flourished despite all odds. Young couples came to visit the rose bush that Josephine had planted, hoping that some of that love would bless their own unions. Josephine lived to be 92 years old. She never remarried, though she honored her promise to Elijah by living a life full of joy. She raised Rose to be strong and kind and brave. She watched her daughter marry a good man and have children of her own. She held her grandchildren and told them stories of the grandfather they would never meet, but would always know through the love he had left behind. On the day Josephine died, she was sitting in her rocking chair on the front porch of the house that Elijah had built with his own hands. The garden was blooming all around her, 50 years of growth and beauty and memory. Her eyes closed, and her last breath left her body, and her family said that she smiled just before she went. They buried her beside Elijah, beneath the old oak tree, where he had asked her to marry him. The headstone bore both their names and a single line that said everything that needed to be said. Their love lives on. And it did. In the garden, in the family, in the story that continued to be told long after both of them were gone. Because true love never really ends. It simply transforms, passing from generation to generation, like seeds carried on the wind, taking root wherever the ground is ready to receive it. Elijah Carter wandered into Cedar Valley with nothing but a tired horse and a lonely heart. He left behind a legacy of love that would touch countless lives for generations to come. And his last word, her name spoken with his final breath, became a symbol of what love could be when two souls found each other against all odds. Josephine, forever.